Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, please click on like and subscribe. If you've been here before, welcome back. As you can see behind me here, I've got some cutting boards laid out. I haven't done a video on making cutting boards yet. There's a lot of videos online how to make cutting boards. I figured I'd go ahead and throw one on here in case you haven't made one before, or if you've made one, maybe a different technique that you might learn. Maybe something I'm doing wrong that you don't like, but either way, I'm gonna show you how I make mine. Most of this wood here came from Home Depot. I did another video on a box. You can get a box of like sour wood. That's the brand name. It's not sour, but I think it's sour, S-A-U-E-R. Basically, it's about 50 bucks and they send you a random box full of hardwoods. Usually you end up pretty good off of it. You can usually make 10 cutting boards out of it. You can make some other things out of it if you want to, but if you're making cutting boards, it's a good way to get a lot of hardwood. That's kind of pre-cut, pre-shaped, already dried, ready to go. The rest of this came from either Amazon or scrap I picked up from other people. But basically, this is, if you're going to buy wood on Amazon, I prefer wood chucks. Don't get confused with some of the other brands. Some of the other brands, Behringer's pretty good. There's a couple in there like Exotic Woods, I think it's called. Bad place to get wood from. It's not dry. It's usually warped. It's just bad stuff. So as you can see, these boards here from Amazon, these basically line up pretty much evenly. It's kind of nice when you buy these because they're already pre-lengthened. They're pre-width. They're pretty much close to where you need to be to make a cutting board. So if you're pre-making cutting boards or a little tabletop or a small box or something, they're nice for that. What they don't really tell you is that they're not all perfectly straight. If you read online, they're cut to like 1/16 of an inch or 1/32 of an inch. As you can see in this board here, it's nice and straight until you get all the way up to there. This board here is tapered in, or this board's tapered in. So basically, we're even all the way down through, except for the top there, and we got one little gap right here. So what we need to do is make these boards as straight as possible without causing any stress to the wood. Now if it's your first time doing it, and again you don't have a lot of tools, don't have a lot of practice doing this, you can take your clamps and you can squeeze this gap out of here. What you do when you squeeze the gap out though, instead of making a nice flush contact like this right here, you'll end up creating a little stress in that board, and it can either cause a warpage later or it can cause it to pop open on somebody. So if you're going to try to resell it, make sure you get these boards nice and straight. So I'm going to show you how to do that next. I'm going to use a straight edge. Now I bought this off of Amazon. I think it's a D-U-B-O-I-S, Dubois. You can use a level if you got a really good level. Just make sure it's a nice straight edge and something solid. All we want to do is we want to put the solid edge up against here, put the board in, and we want to ride both pieces through at the same time. So we're going to push them both through at the same exact time. That will ensure that the board doesn't twist or turn and follow this pattern down here. If you push it in without it, you may get the same exact pattern by doing it that way. So with this edge, that will make this edge perfectly straight. And then all I have to do is flip it over and run it through again. So since we've got all of our boards set up over there, I'm basically going to take every one of those boards and I'm going to run them through, just nipping the outside edge off to make sure I've got true edges on the side. So I'm going to show you how to do one, and then I'm going to just skip to the end after I get those all leveled out. Now to line this up, what I want to do is I want to take my straight edge, lay it on my table, take my board, lay it on the table. I just want to slide it over till it just barely bumps the blade. I want it tight enough that it'll pull through, but not so tight that it rotates the blade. As I pull this back, I can see my wiggle ends right here. So what I want to do is snug this up to where it's just touching the blade on my short side. I'm going to lock it in place. I'll pull this up out of here, and then when I run these through together, it's going to stay on this edge of the board and not follow this edge of the board. So I've got more space back here to keep a nice straight edge down this side. And then again, I'm going to run all my boards through, and then I can flip them over and cut the size or the width I want off of the straight edge that I've already got. So after you pull this out of the saw, when I flip my edge over now, I can tell I've got a nice straight edge all the way down this side. So the next time I run this board through, I can put this up against the fence, have a nice side that's going to be smooth and run right through the board. Now, if you're doing a lot of these, like I'm going to do, I'm going to take a pencil and just make a little pencil mark on the inside of each one of these. That way I can remember which side's my finished side in case they get thrown over in a pile or get knocked over or whatever. I'll know to run this side through the saw. So same thing I did before. Now that we got our inside edge against our fence, slide this up against your blade, push in just a little bit so there's a little pressure on it. Pull your board up out of there, and then when you run through, it should just take the outside edge off of this, leaving you the most board as possible. Again, if you just want to make this 1 1/4 inches, you can set your fence to where it's 1 1/4 inches and take off 1/4 inch. You'll have a straight edge. But again, since I'm just taking the edge off of here, I'm not worried about it. So again, inside edge against the fence, and we're going to run them through. Okay, now that I've got all my boards cut the width, they've got nice straight edges on them. They all fit together really well. So I can glue this up and clamp it down now. And again, I'm gonna run this through a planer when I get it all done. If you have any big edges from a saw blade, like if you have teeth marks on here, depending on how sharp your saw is or how fast you pushed it through, if you get caught or something a little bit, sometimes you'll take a little dig in here. You can clean this edge up a little bit with some sandpaper. If it's a little bit deeper, you can run it through your joiner. Now this one's not too bad, so I'm just gonna take some sandpaper, my finger, and hit the edge of it just to make sure I get these little swirl marks off of here. And mine are very faint, so depending on how bad your saw or how sharp your saw is, you got a good sharp clean blade on there, it should cut through there with leaving minimal damage to the wood. So with my little jig over here, I just want to take some painter's tape and put it on top of it, because we're going to glue on this, and we don't want the glue to stick to our other hardwood. I'm using maple on the bottom. This is what I had left over from a job. So I've got my little setup here. What I'm going to do is just take these boards, lay them across here. That way I've got a nice flat surface. Now, even though my table underneath is crooked or wobbly or whatever, the surface where my boards are laying is nice and flat. And also when I made this little template below, I made it for 16 or 24-inch cutting boards, because you want to have enough room to put a piece of wood or something across the back of here. So when you clamp this down, you want to make sure they stay nice and even all the way across. So you have enough room for a clamp at the end along with clamps down the side. So when you design your little table, jig, whatever, keep that in mind. So I've got my clamps set up to where they're about the same width of the board. I'm not going to put them on yet, of course. I want a couple clamps at the end here to keep the boards nice and even. That way when you're clamping down, you don't create a bow or a flex in the middle of it, and it keeps them nice and straight. So what I'm going to do is put a board on the top, a board on the bottom, clamp these boards first to keep the boards from moving, and then I'll put my side clamps on. So with those taped up, I'm going to put these two on this end, these two on this end. I've got my small clamps here to clamp those down and my big clamps to clamp the width-wise. So what I'm going to do now is glue them. Now, everyone's got their own theory on gluing. I'm going to use regular type bond wood glue. I'm only going to glue one side of this. I'm going to put it on liberally. Some people actually glue both sides of the wood. But to me, you just end up with a lot of over squeeze. If you glue this side and make sure that the glue is on here really good, and you got just a little bit of a layer on it, when you push it up against this side, it's going to glue it to it anyhow, so you don't really need to glue both sides, in my opinion. I've never had a cutting board fall apart on me. Doesn't mean that one won't one day, but I'm only going to glue the one side on each one of these boards. So the last board doesn't need anything at all. So glue, 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 flip them all over, put them together. All right, so now that I'm glued up, I'm going to flip my boards back down, slide them into place. I don't want to clamp them or smush them together yet. I'm just going to flip them over so they touch each other. And what I'm going to do is I just take it and rub it a little bit back and forth. That way it gets the glue on and kind of smushes it on both boards. I'm going to line my ends up as close as possible. Now I will be nipping off the ends of these on both sides to make sure it's nice and even at the end. So if you're not perfectly straight at the end, it doesn't really matter. What you want to do is make sure though, if you're widthwise, like I'm putting mine on a planer, my planer is 13.5 inches. So if your planer doesn't hold 13.5 inches, you might have to do this in 2 sections and then glue those 2 sections together. So I've got it set up the way I want it. I'm putting my boards on the end here. Again, a couple little clamps. I want to put these not all the way at the end, but close to the end, and clamp these down. So again, I keep my boards nice and straight. And as always, this is a whole lot easier when you're not trying to stay out of a camera, or if you're not trying to record as you go. Now if my boards get off a little bit at the end here, which it looks like they're going to, I'll just take and loosen these clamps up a little bit and slide them all so I've got my boards even at the end again. And again, you might not line up on both sides. As long as you line up close on one side or the other, when you go to trim these off, it shouldn't be too bad. You should have like 1/8 or 1/16 of an inch on each side that you have left over. All right, so what I'm gonna do is clamp the middle pieces now. I'm not gonna put these on tight. I'm just gonna snug them up. And again, you don't wanna over clamp anything ever. You put too much pressure on it and you're creating torque or twist in the middle of the wood. And you don't wanna do that. You want it tight, but like these clamps I'll put, I think these are 300-pound clamps. I don't need 300 pounds of pressure on these boards. I just need them to stay together, snug, so it holds on. Go ahead and clamp this side. Now, some people clamp from the bottom and the top. I'm going to put a couple clamps on the bottom. Again, these are not tight yet. These are just kind of sitting in place, holding the wood together until I can flip it over. Once I get it snugged up good, I'm gonna pull my end pieces off and then flip it over on its end, and that way I can put clamps on the bottom side of it. So again, these are just loose right now. I'm gonna put a little pressure on them just to hold the boards together. I'm gonna reclamp these tight. These need to be tight on the ends to keep the boards nice and straight. Once I do that, I'm gonna go ahead and put a little bit more pressure on each one of these, not a lot. And technically, we're kind of clamped together now. You should be able to pull these off. Now, if you... Same thing, not a lot of pressure. Just snug it up so everything stays nice and tight. Now, once I get these two on, I'm gonna move these two out a little bit or put two more on the outside edges, just so I got the outside edges of my board seamed together, because if you don't get it right, you will have little cracks at the end. You just got to chop off more of the board at the end. And again, once you get all that done, double check your clamps. Again, tight but not tight. You don't want to bow the board any. So we're going to clean up the mess now. I'm going to get the table cleaned off so I can clean off the board, sit this in the corner, start on the next one. Now it's been probably 15 minutes since I put the glue on it, put the clamps on it. I let them sit usually overnight, 16, 18 hours. I recommend 24 hours. So looking at my math here, I'm 13 1/4 inches, so I need to take 1/4 inch off of here. So I'm gonna run it through my table saw. I'm gonna take 1/8 inch off this side, maybe a little bit more than 1/8 inch, and a little bit more than 1/8 inch off of this side. And that way the board will still look symmetrical across. And again, it'll fit in my planer. So when I set my table saw up here, I want to make this 13 1/8 inches. Since I'm going to take off 1/4 on both sides of my board, I'm going to set the blade though on the 1/8 inch mark. And that way when it cuts it off, it'll actually take off a little bit more than 1/8. And that way I'm just a hair thinner than 13 and it fits through my planer without worrying about it binding or trying to get caught in there. So with that side off, I can take this now. I'm going to put my blade at 13, and again I'm going to set it on the blade. That way it'll actually be a little bit inside of the 13. Alright, sorry for the extra noise. I have to turn on the little air filter to do this because this kind of makes a big mess. And again, since I do use my garage for my vehicles, I have to clean this mess up pretty much every single day. And that's why all my stations are on portable stations. Like this just spins back against the wall, that slides against the wall. Table saw goes over in that corner, so I've kind of got everything to where I can just pull it out, use it, turn it around, slide it back once I clean up behind it. Now the first pass I make on this, I just want to take a thin layer off of it, and then I'm going to kind of start working down until it feels like it's perfectly smooth across. I'm going to flip it over, do the same thing on the other side. Now, depending on what you're doing with your board, if you want to cut this in a funky shape or however you want to shape it, just draw it out, and you can cut it out with your bandsaw, jigsaw, whatever you're going to cut it with. For simple purposes, I'm just going to round these corners off. I got this little kit off of Amazon. I'll put the listing in the link below. These are really nice because they've got different angles, different cuts. You put this on the corner of your board, throw this through your router, and basically it'll do the radius for you. Got nice straight edges around there. Instead of trying to use a jigsaw and then having to take your sander and try to make it look like it's perfect. So again, I'm just going to take this. I'm going to find where my shortest board is, which is probably this one right here. Bump it so it just clears the board. Make sure I'm pressed all the way against my fence. Now again, with these, they come with different radiuses. I'm going to use a 35 on this, just to round my corner off, so I got a nice rounded edge on it. If you were hand cutting this out, even if you don't have a router, if you buy this little kit, you can still pencil draw these, and you can still cut these out by hand and still make them look better than if you freestyled it. Or worst case, you grab like a paint can or something like that, put it on the corner, draw your radius that way. Now that I've got my corners rounded, I'm going to go ahead and sand this before I round over my edges. I want to do that in case I've got any little imperfections, like the planer left a little groove here. I need to probably change my blades. I've been using them for a while now. So when I sand, I'm going to be using a 120 and a 220 grit. I'm going to hit with the 120 the first time to get out any imperfections that I've got in here. I'm going to hit it with the 220 after we bevel the edges over. And after we wipe down the board with some water, that'll make the green pop. I'll hit it with the 220 for the final finish. I'm not going to push on it. I'm going to let the sander do the work. Don't dig in. If you got a little groove here, don't take the edge of your sander and roll it and try to get it out. Just keep going nice and flat. Let the sander do the work. Don't push too hard. So after my initial sanding, I've clamped my board to my table just to help me keep it from wobbling on me a little bit. I'm going to take a 1/4 inch round over bit, round over the edges. If you do not have a small handheld router like that, you can take your sandpaper or your sander and roll the edges over too. But that little guy for less than $100, well worth the money. One other thing to notice too is if you start getting burn marks on here, my blade is probably shot in there. I've done I don't know how many cutting boards with that round over bit. Since they're like 30 bucks a piece though, I try to use them until I start burning the wood up like I am now. I can still sand this out, it's not super bad, but I'm not going to get many more cutting boards out of this without starting to damage the wood a lot. So time to buy a new blade. I'm going to flip this over, do the other side. Alright, so it's time to sand again. I'm going to sand this back out. I'm going to get all my burn marks or most of my burn marks off of there. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is take a wet paper towel, wipe the board down, and that'll basically make the green kind of ruffle up a little bit, and then we'll final sand it once it's dry. But again, this is not super wet, but it's wet enough to get all the stuff off the board. If there's any fine holes or anything, it'll get it out of there. And you'll also get to see what your board's actually going to look like once you get it wet, once it's oiled. So that versus that. So again, wipe down all your edges. Just want to make sure we get it all cleaned up a little bit. I got most of my burn marks off, as you can see. They come off fairly easy. The corners are hard to get. I could probably do a little bit better. And when I final sand it, I'll hit them again. Because again, we're not finishing the board yet. This is just the next to final sand. Right now we're just cleaning it up. We're gonna let it dry for probably an hour. And then we'll sand it one more time and I'll finish getting all my little brown marks off of it and finish the board up. So I'm gonna put this somewhere where it'll sit in the corner and stand upright and dry off. All right, so my board's completely dry. I'm gonna hit it with 220 again. I normally don't go like a 400 or anything. We want the oil to soak into the board. You want the grain to be tight, but you don't want it to be so tight that oil won't soak into the board, or you'll be treating it all the time over and over. So I'm gonna hit it again with this 200, go over the edges, again, finish up my little edges that I got still problems with, make it nice and smooth, then be ready to oil it. And just one other thing when you're sanding, you'll see other people do this. I don't do it on every project. Some projects I do depending on what I'm doing, but like cutting boards, I normally don't do it. But if you're new at this and you're new at sanding, you can take a pencil and lightly pencil the entire board. And that way when you're sanding, you'll know that you've hit every single spot on the board. So now that I've got all the edges sanded out, smoothed out, all my little marks off of here, we're gonna oil the board. Now, there's a lot of different methods. A lot of different people use different stuff on this. I use mineral oil a lot of times if I'm doing a lot of cutting boards and batch them out. I've got one of those big containers you can get, like a plastic storage container. I just dump the mineral oil over it and let them soak in the bucket for a little while and pull them out. If you're only doing 1 or 2 boards, you can get these small little bottles at your box stores. Basically put some cutting board oil on there or mineral oil. Once that's soaked in for a little while, I usually let that soak in for a day. I'll treat it again with this cutting board oil, and then once it's dry again, I'll put the butcher block conditioner on there. Make sure it says food grade on there if you are going to cut and put food on this. So again, I'm going to give this 24 hours to soak in. I'll re-oil it again, and then we'll put some block conditioner on it. All right, so here's our board after the second oiling. It's pretty well ready to go. I'm going to put some either wood butter on it or butcher block conditioner. I prefer the wood butter. This is Bearded Chef. Works really well, stays on really good. Either way, you want to seal your board with whatever you want. And again, make sure it says food grade on it. Don't use something that's not food grade if you're going to cut on it. This is just like waxing a car. Wax on, wax off. And again, this is better if you can warm it up a little bit. It's cold in the garage, so this is going to be kind of fun to do out in the garage. Normally I do this inside the house. I'll put the tin on the stove a little bit, just so it warms up a little bit. So I'm just going to kind of show you how I put it on. I go with the grain of the board and just work it in. Don't push too hard. After it sits there for a few minutes, take it, buff it off. You'll be able to feel the board difference between this and this. Maybe 2 coats of that on there, and then your board's ready to use or sell. All right, there's our finished product. Hope everyone enjoyed the video. Please click on like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you've got questions or comments, please leave them below. Any criticisms, I'm open to them. The only way to get better in life, I think, is to be criticized. So if you have any questions, comments, things I did something better, something worse than somebody else, something wrong, let me know what you think.